I've had at least one request, maybe two, to do a video on astrophotography, and if you've watched any of my introductions, you've seen some of the photographs I've taken of things in space. A lot of it you can't see unless you have a camera that can take a several second exposure of the sky. And I actually have a series planned eventually on astrophotography. There's a lot I'm still learning, and but I think there's enough that I can share with you right now that will help if you're interested in learning to take pictures of space. A lot of people think you need a very powerful telescope to be able to see things in deep space, say the Andromeda Galaxy or the Orion Nebula. As a matter of fact, I did take this photograph of the Andromeda Galaxy with a telescope, although it was not particularly powerful, and the photograph of the Orion Nebula was actually done with a 300mm lens on my camera. They're timed exposures, and both required the camera to move with the rotation of the Earth, which sounds complicated, but in reality it's not that big of a deal. A lot of the time, in order to get good images of space, we actually need to back off a little bit. We don't need to have a very tight view of the sky produced by a lot of magnification. Most of the time, to get really cool images like this one, all you need is a tripod, or in my case here, just a fence post, and about an 8-second exposure. And this photograph was actually taken just out of the blue. I looked up, could see the Milky Way, and I had my camera with me, and backed off the magnification as much as I could, increased the ISO as high as it could go, and just set the camera on a fence post. I didn't have my tripod with me. And then just a quick post enhance using my favorite photo editing software, and there you go. It's honestly a really cool photograph, but it is not a difficult image to make. In fact, if you live in the northern hemisphere, the summer is the best time to take an image like this. Now, if you live in the northern hemisphere, summer is also not the best time to take, well, actually if you live in any hemisphere, summer is not usually the best time to take astrophotographs because, well, the air is a lot more humid and there's a lot more density between you and space. But this photograph was fairly easy to take, and if you want to get a photograph of the Orion Nebula, all you need is an 8-second exposure, an ISO of about 6400, and a lens. I believe the lens that I was using has the widest aperture is like f5. If you can get a wider aperture, that's great. If you back your focal length out as far back as you can, in this case I was using an 18mm, I think, setting, which I don't remember what it translates with the cropped CCD or crop sensor on the camera, but it's somewhere around 24mm, I think, with the crop sensor. All you need is an 8-second exposure, and you can get images of nebula, kind of get an idea what galaxies might look like, definitely get pictures of stars, and you won't get much in the way of star trailing because you don't have a lot of magnification. Another cool thing about using a camera, just a regular camera, without a telescope, is there's not much in the way of modifications or special knowledge you have to have in order to make an image. And in the case of this photograph of the International Space Station, all I did was set the camera up on a tripod. I set my focus and on some trees in the distance, and waited for the station to show up. And all you have to do, there's a couple of websites out there, you plug in your zip code, it'll tell you when it's going to show up and how bright it's going to be and where to look. And that's all I did, and it showed up right on time as this bright gold dot moving across the sky. And I don't remember exactly how long off the top of my head this exposure is, probably about 13 seconds. You can actually see some stars trailing in the background, and to me it was pitch black, but because the sun had just gone down, the sun was still lighting the sky up a little bit, so that makes the image look a little bit blue. In fact, in this period of the introduction, I was actually getting ready to take that photograph. Unfortunately, the audio is kind of bad because the camera had the back cover rattling, so all you heard was, well, noise. As far as more advanced photography techniques, I'm sure I'll get to cover that eventually, but there really isn't that much in the way of complicated knowledge, anything you have to have in order to be able to do it. This photograph was taken using a barn door style star tracker. I made it out of a large hinge I found at the hardware store. And eventually I'll get into details on how it works. The hardest thing actually is focusing, because you can't see the object in the viewfinder half the time, and the other half of the time the stars just don't seem to be bright enough, and when they are bright enough, you can't really tell what's in focus and what isn't. So take a few photographs, move the focus in and out, and then once you actually get a focus you like, tape the focus down so it doesn't accidentally move, because this photograph, like I said, I think was a 13-second exposure, and there's a lot of things that can move in 13 seconds. But yeah, don't get aggravated with it, keep trying, and if it doesn't work, try again. And then take your photograph, put it in your favorite photo editing software, and all you've got to do is enhance the image. I'm not going to spend any time telling you exactly how I did it, because my program's probably going to differ from yours, and there's a lot of good tutorials out there to show you how to use your specific program to get the images to come out the way you'd like them. I'm not getting into stacking or anything complex like that at the moment, because there's really no reason to. I have not taken the time to go that in depth with the technique yet, and y'all are learning as I'm learning, so that's kind of how this channel works. This photograph was taken using a telescope with a tracking mount. It was actually a gift from a friend, and I'd like to give a shout out to that friend, and you know who you are, thank you very much. Basically, it's a computer mount that automatically moves the telescope across the sky and tracks, but it really doesn't track anything, it just knows the rotation of the Earth and knows where you are and where to look. This method works for short-term exposures, maybe 20 seconds or less, for most telescopes. Because the tracking is a little bit off, there's, especially with an older mechanism, even with a newer one, unless you spend an incredible amount of money, you're really not going to get the performance that a more advanced system will give. In fact, I've even watched YouTubers get particularly aggravated at a brand new, very expensive system that just won't track. So there are other alternatives to using a computer. You can actually manually track the sky using a spotting scope, and a camera usually is the technique, a webcam. But that requires a lot of precision, and I would assume a very heavy telescope, because every time I've tried it, it just shakes too much. Your breathing, your heartbeat, anything that can affect you when you're trying to take this type of picture is going to affect it. So the less time you have your hands on the camera, the better. In fact, when I took these photographs, I actually put a delay on the camera. It was a 2-second delay from when I hit the shutter to when I could just let go, and that allowed the vibration in the camera to stop. In fact, in the photograph of the ISS, you can actually see a slight bit of vibration as the ISS moves along. The camera shakes a little bit until it just gets nice and smooth a little further down the way. And that was just with the camera on a tripod and a 300mm lens. So it's not a complicated thing to do. It's just there's a detail here and there, and if you practice, you can get some pretty good images. The main thing to look out for when you're just starting, and this really aggravates people who are just starting trying to take a picture with a telescope, is knowing how to set the camera up on a telescope. If you're just using regular lenses, it's not that big of a deal. There's very little learning curve. There's very little you have to do other than plug and play. With a telescope, you've got mounts that include eyepiece mounts. I'm using what's called a prime focus mount, which I actually built, and I'll eventually show you how it's done, or how I did it. And different mounts are designed for different types of photographs. If you're intending on taking pictures of planets, you're going to need an eyepiece mount, and you're going to need to have it set up for some pretty good magnification. Now, if you're just going to use your regular lenses, you're going to need probably about a 500mm lens or better. Thankfully, planets are very bright, so you don't need a lot of aperture, or you don't need a lot of, the lens doesn't have to be very large. In fact, most of the time whenever I'm taking pictures of planets, I usually have to dim the ISO way down and bring the aperture way down, because they're so bright. Unless you're trying to take pictures of moons, in which case you got to bring it up quite a bit. When you're trying to take pictures of nebula and galaxies, you really don't need a lot of magnification. It's helpful to have it, but you have to remember the Andromeda Galaxy is approximately 6 moons across. If you put 6 full moons right next to each other, that's about the size of the galaxy in our sky if you just were to look up and see it. And on a really dark night in the northern hemisphere, you can definitely see it. It's usually best visible, I think, January to March, and It's not that hard to find. It'll show up in the eastern sky, northeastern sky, go right overhead, then set in the west, just like the sun does. And if you have a really dark area and your eyes are very well dark adapted, you'll see this smudge in the sky that's about 3 moons across, and that's about all you're going to see. You add a camera to that, the next thing you know, you can see all kinds of cool detail. You plug in a good image processing software and you'll get a pretty good approximation of what you're looking at. In fact, it's hard to see in this image, but the photograph actually preserves some of the blues from the arms of the galaxy, which is really cool. If you have the time and the money it takes to get the software and the time to process it, being able to stack the images will give you a much better result. This is not a particularly complicated process, but I haven't arrived at that point yet, and like I said, I'm doing this as I learn, so you know, makes it more fun that way, I guess. But yeah, there's a lot of good astrophotography channels on YouTube. My goal right now is to try to take pictures of things that you can't normally see with your eyes and make it possible for someone with a very small budget to be able to get started and get going and have fun. You don't need multiple thousands of dollars to get good photographs. You just need a good equipment, and most cameras nowadays are actually pretty good even if they're not DSLRs. And just need some time to learn the equipment and be patient with it, and look up different ways to take photographs. My channel is dedicated to learning how to take pictures with basic equipment. Of course, we're not just going to take pictures, we're going to do a lot of other cool things too, but yeah, so. Well folks, that's just about it for this video. I'm hot, I'm tired, it looks like it's about to rain. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and ring that bell. If you ring that bell, you'll get notifications whenever I post a new video. And of course, liking and subscribing really helps me out, so appreciate y'all who have done that. This is a completely different format video than I normally do. If y'all like it, please let me know. There's not a script in front of me, so there's a whole lot of more blah 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 blahs, but hey, you know, it's part of it. And I did buy that selfie stick I promised. I'm using it right now. I'm not sure exactly how well it's going to turn out, but we'll, I guess I'll see you in a couple of minutes. So, I'm Jay. Have fun, be safe, and I will see you next time. Hey, Marcus. Parrot head. So anyway, till next time, I'm fun. I'm fun. Yeah, I am fun, right? Hey, be nice.